Working with brushes is very similar to working with patterns. So like I said earlier, a lot of stuff will look somewhat similar, and creating brushes and creating brush styles will be fairly similar to creating patterns. There's a few different options you have with creating some custom brushes like scatter brushes and things like that. But basically, what this exercise will be working on for the most part, we'll be creating a bunch of different brushes using this sort of template exercise, whatever assignment you want to call it, where we can create a variety of different brushes. So when we go to our brush palette here, our little, looks like a cup with brushes, you can see that we have some basic brushes, chalk scribbles, you have a whole bunch of presets, and I'll open this up so we can really see it. You have some presets, and like anything else in Illustrator here, you have your brush library, and it's loaded with a ton of different brushes. Same thing with like our color palettes, your color books, which we went over earlier in the semester, swatches, symbols, etc. You have arrows, you have more artistic brushes, which come in really handy for creating a variety of different looks. Where some of these come from, some of these chalk brushes and more sort of handwork brushes come in. Calligraphic, charcoal pencil, ink, paintbrush, scroll pen, etc., etc. You have borders, which are exactly how they sound. They're borders. They have some decorative, some geometric, things like that. Some novelty borders. I'm not sure exactly what that is. And then, again, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but bristle brushes, decorative brushes, image brushes, which you can bring in images to create brushes. Vector packs, these are a little bit more advanced, but you see, and then you can load custom libraries as well. But using brushes, I know we've played with it a bit before. For any of the presets, using any of these preset brushes, this is just sort of a sample of a few of their more artistic brushes. You select your object. This is obviously just a stroke, an open path with just a black stroke on it. And you'll see when you open your brushes and use some of the presets, you have these sort of more artistic variety of brushes here with some of the specialty brushes. Some of the calligraphic brushes here, you can see how they kind of open up, widen and thin out like a calligraphy brush, calligraphy pen, and you can adjust all of these. Again, these are their basic brushes, and then these handle, a lot of times we use these in tandem with our stroke options. So like some of these, you might not want to have, this brush stroke be gigantic. Or a lot of these artistic brushes, like this, that's not charcoal. I don't know why that popped up like that. This is one of the ink brushes. And you can see it kind of creates this sort of layered ink wash kind of brush. But it's also like super, super thick. So you can play around with this and drop that down a little bit to give it a little bit more of a somewhat realistic look. As for creating custom brushes, you can have, let's open up one of the crazy scatter brushes. So we open some of the more, I shouldn't say crazy, but some of the more, I don't know, decorative, whatever, brushes. You can see they work, your palette looks, again, sort of similar to the patterns palette once we have custom patterns in there. These are different types of scatter brushes that are preloaded. You can use these on a path, and you can see since they're a scatter brush, they're kind of random. And you'll see as we go through, you have these 3D objects, 3D elements here, and we have our other objects here. And the reason I'm just kind of clicking through to show you a variety, like this one in particular, is a little bit more sort of out there. This is a really good example of sort of a random scatter brush. And we can create custom scatter brushes. What it allows you to do is use vector objects in a similar way to patterns to create a brush that will create this sort of like randomized effect, I guess. It's not really an effect, but you get the idea. So instead of having, like for one of the parts of this assignment, we're going to use the star and create it on the line, so it just goes around the line, like, which one was that? One of these was more perfectly around the line, around your stroke. But what scatter brushes allow you to do is create a preset, bless you, create sort of a preset to where it's sort of truly randomized. To try to create, I don't know if you guys have ever done it, but to try to create something that looks random and scattered is really, really hard to do. At least I find it like extremely hard to do. Whenever I try to create anything that looks like it's just sort of like arbitrarily scattered around for whatever, like paint blobs or something like that, it's like impossible to actually like make it so it looks like you haven't placed things on purpose. At least for me, I get too particular about it. So this is where your scatter brush comes in. It's super handy. And you can get into the options just like any other. Oh, it's not going to let me edit, probably because it's a preset. Let's add that to brushes here. There we go. So we need to click when we have it in our brushes. Generally once you use, like all of these are showing up now because I've actually clicked through them and used them, they'll show up in your brushes palette. So if you wanted to edit any of the preset brushes, especially the scatter brushes, in your brushes palette, rather than the library, in your brushes palette you can double click and you see we have all of our scatter brush options. We have the name, and this happens when we create a new brush as well. You know, you have your typical name option here. You can call it whatever you like. And then you'll see here we have some of the size, spacing, scatters, where it's relative to. It's either relative to the page or relative to the path. If you want to have, in this case, the scatter brush is relative to the page, so that it basically keeps your document size in mind for how it's scattering the brush, as opposed to the path. You can see for this one it's not crazy different, but you can see it sort of scatters it a bit more when it's in relation to the page rather than in relation to the path. It kind of goes more around the path, and the random scatter isn't as noticeable because it's just around the path rather than the relative to the page. This isn't a great example to show you, but you can see, you know, some of these are tighter up here and then they're a little bit looser here. So you can see we have here, let me open up a different one actually. We'll go to this one. It was a little bit better. A little bit better scatter example. There we go. So this random dots pattern, now you can see relative to page versus relative to path. Again, it just sort of tightens it up a little bit. This is a fairly simple path, so it's not going to show you a crazy difference. But relative to the page, you'll see it kind of scatters it a little bit more. But you see in our options here, where you have the size, you can have it be fixed or random. A fixed size will give you, if we change this to fixed, will give you one size, obviously. So this is all 66% from the original vector objects. So now you can see all of the dots are now all the same size. So if you want to have these be a little bit more random, like this, you select random, and then you can set presets here so you can have your size, and this again relative to the original shape that you're using. And this will make more sense when we actually create one out of the star pattern. You know, you can have them go down from, say, about, I wanted to do 25% to 200%, let's say, And now you can see the sizes really changed from what they were. So you can have them go from anywhere from 25% of the original size to 200% of the original size, and it gives you a little bit more of a size difference. Your spacing, again, you can do the same thing. If you have it fixed, it's going to depend on how you're applying this. If you have a random spacing, and for this pattern it's not going to change all that much, but again, you can have this go anywhere from pretty much 0 to 1,000%, and this is all going to be relative to the your original shapes. 9 times out of 10 for scatter brushes, there's going to be times where you use a random spacing for sure, but like for me personally, 9 times out of 10 for spacing, I usually use the fixed spacing, even though I want something that looks like super scattered. And then you have your scatter, which is how much it kind of, how much it sort of places all of these, how much it basically scatters all of the dots in this case. And again, you can have it go from, you can see the scatter on this path spreads out a little bit more as we play around with both of these. And then the rotation, in this case it doesn't matter because these are all circles, so it's not really going to, rotating these circles isn't going to do anything. But if you have, in the one assignment that we're going to be doing, we're using a graphic. It's like a fly, so you want the flies all sort of buzzing around in different directions. And you can have the rotation, again, be either fixed or random. And basically what it does is it rotates the objects. And again, you can have that anywhere. Let's say if we did, again, it's not really going to do anything because they're circles, but it's rotating. Well, I guess it is doing a little bit. What it's doing is it's rotating the 3 objects together to where you see these 3 patterns together. So you can go anywhere from negative 180 to 180 degrees, and you can see it sort of shifts our pattern a little bit. When you're using something that's more of a singular object, like the fly graphic we're going to be playing with, for example, it basically turns our fly around. And you can set that rotation to have it again go anywhere from negative 180 to 180. You can also tighten that up if you want it to go 90, give or take, negative 90 to 90, etc. So you can have basically Illustrator create a more random effect for you, a more random scatter, than trying to do this yourself by placing the vector objects. It allows you to to create and edit more random scatter patterns. I'm going to cancel this so we don't actually save over the original. So as for, I'm just going to go back to a basic stroke here. For creating patterns, like I said, it's fairly easy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to trash all these guys because we don't need them in our palette. So creating a new brush is pretty simple. It's a lot like creating a brush with creating a pattern. What you can do is, let's say we wanted to create a brush with not that, we didn't want to include that, with this star pattern here. Couple different ways you can do it. Again, just like patterns, you can drag it up to your brushes palette. And this time what it asks you, instead of just adding it like a pattern, it actually brings up, it knows you're making a new brush. So there's a couple different options. Since it's a group of vector objects, calligraphic brush and bristle brushes are not available options. So you can create either a scatter brush, an art brush, or a pattern brush. They do fairly different things, but let's say we want to create this scatter brush. We're going to hit OK. And then here we have our star scatter. And again, going through some of these options, you know, we can have our random. I'm just going to kind of arbitrarily, well, maybe not 600. I'm going to sort of arbitrarily do this, and let's have our spacing come down. We're going to have our scatter be random. I don't want it to be too crazy, but, and then here the rotation. We'll go, give or take, there. So what this will do is we'll rotate the object around. Instead of, since it's not that grouping of 3 circles, it's not rotating the 3 circles together, it'll be rotating our star. So this is creating our scatter brush. We're going to hit OK. And now, again, theoretically, it doesn't look like it did anything much like our pattern until we apply it. So now, when we have our scatter brush and we apply it, wow. To our, maybe I should have done the size a little bit differently. Let's see if we can adjust this a little bit. Yeah, to where we have, probably should have had the size a little bit less than that. There we go. Let's bring this down to 20. Then we can bring this up just a little bit, so it's not so crazy. So now you can see we can adjust that. You can adjust that scatter, or adjust any of your options for that matter, for our scatter brush that we created. And now this warning will tell us it doesn't do it with patterns, but it's saying that we've edited the pattern. Do we want to leave what we have alone, or do we want to apply the new edits? And we'll just hit apply. Sometimes, at first, I was like, I don't know why I made the edit. Why would I not want to apply it? But then I guess there's some cases where you might not want to apply if you did some adjustment and you just wanted to see what it looked like and save it for later. I guess you could not apply it to the current stroke. Creating, let's go back. Here we go. Creating an art brush to use. Instead of dragging and dropping, you can also create a new brush. And when you have the object selected, it'll create the new brush from the object. Instead of dragging and dropping, again, it's doing the same exact thing. Either dragging and dropping your object, using your contextual palette, or even hitting the new brush button when you have an object selected. It all does the same thing. It's just going to kind of be what is more comfortable for you. For me, dragging and dropping is pretty easy. I prefer that. So what we're going to do here is, for this brush, we're going to create an art brush. So let's hit OK. And then here, this brings up a couple different options. Since we're using this object to create a brush, you can have it scale proportionally. Again, you can have a fixed width or a random width. You can have your direction, how you want basically the start and end point, where you want the start and end point to be. So at this point, you can kind of see it. Let's zoom in a little bit. You can see the start point is at the tip of the pencil, and then it ends. You see the arrow pointing in that direction. It ends at the eraser. If you wanted it to go the other way, to where the start point is the eraser going to the tip of the pencil, you can also have it, the direction, go from top to bottom or bottom to top. Colorization, we're going to leave this alone at this point, but you can also you can tint your objects to give it a little bit of different colors if you wanted to from the original object. We're not going to do that. And then you can also flip along the path or across a path for a variety of other different options. In this case, we're just going to kind of keep it simple. And then we're going to hit OK. And now you can see we have our pencil brush, just like these chalk brushes and charcoal brushes, etc. And let's select our circle, and then we'll apply the brush. And then you can see now we have our funky pencil going along the path. This is where, let's double click to edit. This is where some of these options here, I was trying to see if it was gonna, yeah, this graphic isn't really gonna, oops, helps if I preview it. There we go. So flipping it, in this case the graphic is gonna be almost like changing direction. You can see what it's doing here when it's flipping across the stroke. You can see it's like using the reflect tool. What it's doing is as we uncheck it, it's taking that sort of inside, what was the inside of the stroke here, or the brush rather, putting it on the outside. Obviously for this pencil one it doesn't do a ton, but for other graphics you can see where that would come in handy. The direction isn't really going to change much. I thought it was going to act just like the flip, because you're working in a circle here. But again, you can change these options and edit once you have them. Once you have the brush in place, I'm going to cancel that. When we apply it to, let's say, one of these strokes here, I thought our direction would affect this graphic not too much. Anyway, you get the idea. Flipping it along, it's going to change. It's going to also change anywhere your stroke is used. So it's kind of linked. So since we're editing the stroke in one spot, it's going to edit it for all of the applications of the stroke. So you can see all of them are changing here. And then you can have a border brush. It gets a little bit more complex, or rather a pattern brush, sorry. And I won't walk through like the entire thing, but you can see the options are a little bit different here. What you can do is, what this allows you to do is create custom borders. So what you can have is it gives you a preview of your corner tiles. So you can have your corners be either auto-centered, and what it does, the previews are a little bit bigger in the book, but what it does is it kind of adjusts the pattern at the corners to adjust them and make them a little bit more even. You can have auto between corners, and what you can see with these kind of, whatever they are, Q-tippy shaped patterns, what it does is it puts new shapes in between the corners, but it does kind of distort it a little bit. And then you have auto sliced or auto overlap, and that sort of makes them a little bit more evenly at the corners. What you can do is you have your corner options, you have your side tile options, and it also shows you the direction of your stroke. I was trying to hover over here. You have your excuse me. You can have pretty much every side of my hover isn't working here. To where you have your corners, your side tiles, there you go, your inner corner, your start tile, and your end tile, so you can create like a custom pattern. So you can basically create a custom border using any of these objects that are in the object that we selected. So you can create these custom border patterns. And again, we have a little bit of if you wanted to have the scale be random, you have some of the same options here, flipping along or across the path, stretching to fit, add spaces to fit, or approximate the path. I'm going to hit OK, and this is going to be a little bit funky, but you can see now it has our pattern brush here, and now this inside corner I did a little bit funky, but and now it creates that. Let's bring that down a little bit. .5. Oh, there we go. So now, this was kind of throwing me off. So now you can see we created a border brush, or a pattern brush as they call it, to create a border. And you can have different corner tiles again if you wanted to have a different object for your corners, to where you can create sort of seamless patterns to create custom borders. And you'll see in your brush here, again, you can edit this as you want. Again, flipping across. There we go. Flipping along or across. Editing your start and end points. The preview sort of shows you how this will fall along a path and along inside and outside corners, etc., etc. So you can play. There we go. You can have your auto between here and update this so that your inside corners and outside corners will sort of match up seamlessly. But it allows you to create custom borders. And now you can see here. So this is the original corner tile, and then it's going to show you how sort of previews here. This is your outside corner, and then your sort of tiles along the path, and then your inside corner, and then any of the other options that you fill would show up here. So it kind of gives you a preview of how your pattern will fall on a stroke. And again, you can adjust these just like any other. Oops. You know, if you wanted to adjust these down to where they're not so giant. Like a lot of the calligraphic brushes and some of the art brushes, you'll need to bring them down a little bit because when you first, like this one in the beginning, when you first apply them, they can be like super, super large. So that's the basics of creating different types of brushes. Again, oops, I'm on my stroke. When we create a new brush, since we don't have anything selected, the scatter brush and the art brush here are not options. But you have a couple different options. You can create calligraphic brushes, which are essentially basic brushes. It allows you to create these angled brushes that create different widths. Scatter brushes we went through, art brushes. Different bristle brushes. If you want to create a bristle brush, it allows you to create a brush that handles somewhat similarly to a paintbrush, and you can adjust all the different patterns, or rather all the different options. You know, your size, your bristle length. So like the longer your brushes are, the density. So if you have a really packed, for those of you that are familiar with painting, if you have a brush that's like has a really packed head, with the density, the thickness of the individual hairs in your brush, the paint opacity you can play around with. The stiffness of the brush is going to determine around corners, like kind of like how, I guess, heavy or light-handed, in air quotes, your brush is. You have a bunch of different options here. So you have your name again, and then you have a variety of different round, blunt, curved, round angle fan brushes. So you have a variety of different types of brushes to choose from, and then a variety of different options. Like if we go to fan, you have a variety of different options, and it's going to preview what that fan brush will generally look like. So just sort of arbitrarily go through it. You get the idea. So you can create custom, essentially custom paint-like brushes here. I'm going to cancel this. And then we went through the pattern brush already. And then the calligraphic brush is a little bit more simple. You can create your angle. Here now you can see where the angle really makes a difference. Let's bring this up. So you're basically creating like a calligraphy tip, if you want to think about it like that. You know, you can have your angle, which is going to determine how these flow around a path. You can also have your roundness vary. So let's give it like a 10% variation here. So this will give it a little bit more of sort of like a hand feel here. You can have your size be fixed or have a variation with your size. Let's make it random just to, and you can see what that's going to do is when you have, this is what generally like the middle of a stroke is going to look like, what the start and the end of a stroke is going to look like, and it's going to vary around that. Where did, oh, there it is. It's going to vary around that stroke. So as we change it to this one here, and I just called it 99 just because it was the 99th brush we used. I did it rather large, so obviously when we apply it at a 1-point stroke, it's kind of thick. So if we go down to 0.25, so now you can see where that variant is here, kind of like when you turn over the brush and then you turn it back over here, it's allowing you to create that sort of hand-worked variant with a calligraphic brush. So they each have different options and different settings that you can play around with to create either patterns or create more artistic strokes.